All this and Everest too.
This is London, the coronation of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty will leave her home at Buckingham Palace to drive to the Abbey Church of St. Peter, Westminster Abbey, for the solemn service of her coronation. Each passing event of this most memorable day will be described for you wherever you may be listening throughout the world by observers along the route and in the Abbey itself.
Let it not be thought that the age of chivalry belongs to the past. Here at the summit of our worldwide community is a lady whom we respect because she is our queen, and whom we love because she is herself.
In a golden coach there's a heart of gold, driving through old London town, with the sweetest queen the world's ever seen, wearing her golden crown as she drives.
We left Greenock and we got to London about 8 o'clock in the evening of the day before Coronation Day. We made our way to the Mall. From that time on, right through till the following morning, the morning of Coronation Day, the people kept arriving, and the Mall was very, very busy through the night with people with their blankets and stools and pillows and thermos flasks. My mother was determined to do this. She wanted to. And of course I was thrilled because I was only 14. It was a big adventure for me.
The drizzle made it very uncomfortable and it was cold, and I don't think anybody really went to sleep. But there was a great feeling of sort of bonhomie anyway. If anything happened on the other side of the road that we could see happening, everybody on our side would cheer and boo or whatever it was. And every time anybody wanted, for instance, to go to the loo and they were let through to the front and out down the street to wherever it was, there'd be great cheers from everybody. It was all like one great big party.
The thing that sticks in my mind is the noise all night. It was like being in a huge crowd at a rugby match in the middle of Wembley Stadium. Human noise all night.
The last few days have shown that pedestrians can create even greater problems than the cars. So I do ask everyone to follow the advice we have given about times of arrival, to comply with the requests of the police officers on the spot, who have one object only, to help you to see all you can in comfort and safety. I hope you'll all have a good view of this historic pageant and a very happy day.
We've never before seen so many motorists in London prior to a state occasion. I have talked to drivers today from as far afield as Merthyr Tydfil, Derbyshire, Bournemouth and Blackpool.
They had put gates all around London so they could keep the flow of traffic out, to keep the centre from being congested. But everybody was so happy. They were laughing and singing and telling jokes. It was a fantastic atmosphere. They had all sorts of things to make themselves higher. They had crates and they had stools, and some stood on tins. There were these periscopes you could buy, which were like white and blue. So lots of people had these periscopes. But those who didn't buy those, they made makeshift periscopes. Anything would do to make themselves look over the crowds. We met a few Germans there. They'd come over from Munich, and then others were from the Rhineland, some were from the north. So it was like strangers meeting, in a foreign country for a royal occasion.
Well, I was really greatly surprised at the holiday atmosphere here, and it's really wonderful. And it's really
well, it just seems like I'm in a dream. I can hardly realize it, that we are here, but the whole United States seems to be thrilled over the coronation. And
we came to Paris and have been traveling through southern Europe and came back especially for the coronation.
We arrived last Saturday and took the American route, I presume you'd say, around Stratford and up through Burford, some of the Cotswold section, and then made sure we got back to London by Monday evening and got into all of the fever pitch of the coronation.
Welcome to Coronation London. This city, transformed by excitement and joy and loyalty, the true centre this June morning of the emotions of the whole wide Commonwealth, and of our friends and our allies as well. And here, before Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty's London home is the right place to begin our rejoicing. And the day, while a little chill, but the early morning rain has gone, there's even a hope of sun, and to warm our hearts as we wait for Her Majesty, we've got the news of the conquest of Mount Everest, a glorious coronation gift for the Queen. We who are placed on the Victoria Memorial have before us the fine eastern front of the palace, so impressive because alone of all the buildings of central London, it remains undecorated. It's no need of bunting and flags, for flying proudly overhead at the masthead is the most significant piece of colour in Britain at the moment, the Royal Standard. There it flies, carrying in its rich fold so much of our history. We are waiting. All is expectant here. It's that moment when we're waiting for the raising of the curtain on this most memorable and most significant of pageants.
And here is a world in waiting, a little pool of silence in a world of sound. Her Majesty is already in her fairy tale under the portico of the grand entrance, and any second now, in all her splendor and gold and scarlet of her postilions, she will drive away from her home into the world waiting outside.
I think the most memorable bit about marching along was when they announced over the tannoy that Everest had been conquered. A very loud cheer went up from everybody. It was quite a shivery kind of experience, and it just made you feel, quite proud to be British at that particular time.
We did feel that it was really quite extraordinary that the news had got back to England so quickly, but we'd been so obsessed by climbing the mount that the case to us.
We were there at base camp. I certainly had a great desire to somehow get a message from London. We had a little radio set, and we succeeded in tuning into London. To our astonishment, we listened to the BBC newscast, or whatever it was called. Having started on the coronation, he informed us that Everest had been climbed. That was an amazing thing, because we hadn't thought it was possible. Having heard that the Queen had sent us personal congratulations, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill and so on, we drank to the health of the Queen, sitting down, I may say, on our ration boxes. There wasn't headroom to stand up in the tent. So that's how we celebrated. Having the news overnight, which she did, Her Majesty's health in Westminster Abbey after she was crowned.
And now is the moment when London first sees her Queen on Coronation Day. Out from the forecourt, out through the wide gates, comes that heart-stirring wonder of the Royal State Coach. It comes in all its flamboyant splendor, drawn by those 8 proud grey horses, the postilions in dark velvet caps and gold-laced jackets. Each horse has a walking man in long scarlet coat trimmed with gold at the head, and the footman, the yeoman of the guard, marching beside the coach itself. The yeomen in all the richness of their Tudor dress. But it's the coach itself that is the richest, most glorious sight of all. For nearly 200 years, it's been the very center of all our great processions. George III commanded it to be made for his own coronation in 1762. And in it, Queen Victoria, King Edward VII and King George V and King George VI rode to the Abbey on their coronation day. Into the uncertainties of the modern age, it rides now with all the bold confidence of the 18th century. And as it comes, the national anthem sounds.
This is Children's Corner. At least that's what we christened it today. From this point, where Northumberland Avenue joins the embankment, the Queen will be accompanied to the Abbey by the cheers of thousands of school children.
I was 11 years old. I was in my first year at secondary modern, and 2 children from each class were to be taken to sit on the embankment and watch the coronation procession. Boys were chosen first, always boys first in those days, and then the girls' names were drawn, and the winning boy had to choose the girl's name. And I can remember clearly it was a Howard somebody, and he chose mine and read my name out and said, "Oh no, not her." He was horrified that he would have to sit with me. And we were all marched in a crocodile, me with the dreaded Howard next to me. And we all were marched along to the embankment to, sit and wait. I think it was very early, and of course nothing was happening, and it was very exciting, and there was a sort of an air of expectancy. We were all waiting for something to happen. We all sort of sat on the floor and chatted, and the guards and the policemen were all set out in different intervals along the route, and he was stood just in front of us. And of course, like kids do, we kept talking to him, and I assume that he was told not to talk to people, and he kept sort of muttering at us out of the side of his mouth that he was on duty and he mustn't speak to us, because we persisted and chatted away. And eventually I think he succumbed to us, and he decided to talk to us. When the Queen came along, they all put their bayonets onto their guns and did a present arms, and this chap cut his hand on this bayonet. And of course us kids were panic stricken for him, that he thought that he'd get into trouble with the Queen. So we found sort of hankies and things for him to cover his hand up. He was absolutely covered in blood, because we thought that was lovely. Apart from the fact we thought the Queen might tell him off.
Coach passes us, and the Queen, with the Duke of Edinburgh on her left, smiling happily, waving to the children, a forest of hands and handkerchiefs and caps, everything the children bring out as the coach passes down the embankment towards Westminster Bridge.
We were all beside ourselves when the Queen came along, and I can remember she looked so lovely. She happened to turn and look in our direction as she went past us. I was convinced it was me that she was waving to. It was something, it brightened up a very drab existence. It was the excitement, more than anything, seeing the Queen all shiny and glittery, as children would expect her to be.
There's a heart of gold driving through old London town.
As we drew into the platform, we could see all the nobility lined up in their red velvet robes, ermine collars, diamonds, tiaras, all waiting to get onto the train, because there was no access to Westminster Abbey via the roads. So as we passed through each station, more and more of them got into the train, and of course by this time the train is very full, so they are all strap hanging. And it was particularly comic to see dukes clutching their coronets under their arms, all holding their velvet robes out of the dust. And I remember feeling very awkward, because I was sitting down and they were standing up, and obviously thought that we should be changing places. But as we got into Westminster Station, everybody disembarked, and we all went up the steps into the foyer of Westminster Station and then went into the tunnel underneath Parliament Street into the House of Commons, and they dispersed to the Abbey and we dispersed to the pavement outside.
I think it was about 5:30 or 6 when the peers and peeresses arrived in their carrying their coronets. One peer dropped his coronet and it bounced musically along the pavement and his sandwiches fell out. That got a cheer from the crowd, of course. Everything got a cheer from the crowd. Then the politicians arrived from abroad and Churchill, but he got the biggest cheer of all. He looked wonderful in his garter robes with Lady Churchill, and he leaned out of the window of his carriage and gave the famous V sign to everybody. I particularly remember the Duchess of Kent, Princess Marina as she became, and she was so beautiful and so regal, and I thought she was exactly like a duchess should be. Then the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret arrived, and the Queen Mother looked so lovely and gracious and smiling. And then after them, the Queen and Prince Philip. I think it was the first time I'd ever seen the Queen, and her beauty took my breath away.
Forward to the acclamation of her peoples, our Queen comes to her crowning. The footstool is placed for her to alight from the royal coach. The colours of the guard lie in the dust before her. The trumpeters are ready to sound the fanfare of homage, and we stand to see Her Majesty as she alights from the coach. And with the Duke of Edinburgh by her side, Her Majesty moves in towards the splendours that await her within the Abbey.
Well, I was captain of the Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion Grenadiers. We moved in procession up the aisle and took up position under the arch of the great screen. It was a wonderful opportunity to see all the personalities coming up the aisle. Churchill, he gave us a very baleful glare, and then Her Majesty gave a very charming smile as she passed up.
There was 29 choristers picked from the Royal School of Church Music. The majority of us were from parish churches all over the British Isles. Some scaffolding just to the east of the organ loft and well above the organ loft. We all got a very good view from up there, better view than probably some of the people in the Abbey, so we was very lucky.
One of my most vivid memories was getting up rather early in the morning, putting on kind of fancy dress, which in my case was called court dress because I refused to go in uniform. I was long out of the army, and going off to assemble. I think the Queen was extraordinary in the service because, to begin with, she looked extremely good. She looked beautiful. She had beautiful robes and costumings to wear. There's a famous dress, I think, for the anointing to keep the oil off her robe. And she did it with extreme skill and adroitness and appeared both innocent and knowledgeable, and you can't ask for much more than that. That's good. Of being at the same time prepared for a lot and at the same time very innocent, and I think that's what worried one, that how long is she going to be captive in this position, because you are both active and captive as a sovereign after all.
It was a hush. It went from tremendous noise and excitement. You could have literally heard a pin drop.
The Archbishop, assisted by other bishops, comes from the altar. The Dean of Westminster brings the crown. The Archbishop takes it from the crimson cushion. He raises it high in the sight of the people and reverently places it on the Queen's head. Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, is crowned.
It was just an absolute total uproar. The guns fired, all the bells in England rang. I mean, it was wonderful. Everybody across you, beside you, behind you, everybody just had this enormous sort of shout, God save the Queen.
God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his our Lord, and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be amongst you and remain with you always. Amen.
The solemnity of the Queen's coronation ends with the glorious triumph of the Te Deum.
She really just looked quite a sad, forlorn person, really, taking the responsibility of the whole Commonwealth onto her shoulders. I felt she was so alone in this big, huge throne.
This is the signal, fanfares for the beginning of the procession in which Her Majesty will depart from the Abbey. Gradually the procession moves from the golden carpet of the theatre, and it is formed on both sides of the throne. The heralds have left their position by the great pillars and taken their appointed places, and now the prime ministers of the members of the Commonwealth are beginning to move, and Sir Winston Churchill turns round as he bears right into the nave for a last look at the high altar, and behind him the Cross of York.
The moment that all of us have been waiting for so eagerly approaches now. Her Majesty the Queen. And the coach moved.
Then the Gloucesters left, the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, and then the Queen wearing her crown, and they got a really tumultuous and rapturous reception because it was the highlight of the whole thing. But the Queen looked tired. She still looked beautiful, but she looked tired, and the crown seemed to press her down, the weight of it. So her great beauty that we'd noticed when she went in, you know, she really looked tired now, but still beautiful, still smiling and still waving. The last person to leave the Abbey was the Duke of Norfolk, who had organised the whole thing, and he shut the door behind him, and he got a rousing cheer because he'd really put on a marvellous show.
Whitehall is a river of colour. The high banks, the facades of the noble buildings which line the street of government. The War Office, a flutter of red, white and blue from the great Union Jacks hanging from its roof. The Horse Guards jutting out like a bold little white cliff. And the shores of the river, the beaches and the pavements, a solid mass of waving, happy people. Already, it's difficult to remember the gently rustling hush which descended. Glass coach containing Her Majesty the Queen Mother and Her Royal Highness the Princess Margaret, those two lovely royal ladies looking radiantly out upon the vast popular concourse which acclaimed them here. And now the band swinging up Whitehall, the band of the Grenadier Guards turning in under Nelson's column.
They whipped us around in to Whitehall, outside the Home Office, to take up position there ready for the Queen when she came out of the Abbey. Now, she must have thought there was thousands of us sailors, but it wasn't. It was a deployment. They took one bunch of guys from one place, as soon as the procession went past them, whipped them away and put them somewhere else. It was most funny. Because the Queen didn't know. She thought there was thousands of sailors lining the route both sides of the road. In actual fact, there was about 1,200 of us, I suppose. There were lots of foreigners, because taking part in the parade were the contingents from the Commonwealth. Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, Samoans. Now, they marched in bare feet, of all things. Oh, you had a babble of foreign voices you could hear in the background behind you. It was such a long procession. At intervals, there was a hold-up somewhere. And the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, her coach stopped right by us. And one of the horses in the escort reared up, threw the trooper off, and the ambulance men, St. John's, carting him away, took the horse into Horse Carriage Parade out of the way. And the Queen Mother, I can see her today beckoning. Oh, so dignified. And the captain of the escort leaned down and said something. Apparently the bloke had a broken collarbone. Sad incident, but a loud Cockney voice shouted out, "Ah, he'll be in trouble, they'll charge him for dismounting without permission."
And right away to our right there, we see the long procession going up towards Marble Arch, and with the rain positively beating down, there's no difference at all in the temper of the crowd, who some of them have been here for, nearly 3 days, waiting for this.
Everybody was exchanging stories of where they come from and how long they've been waiting. Like blitz stories in the war, everybody was trying to outdo everybody else. It was all very good-natured, and there was a lot of banter. You had the atmosphere and the sound of heads craning and flags fluttering. It's still pouring with rain, but we didn't seem to mind too much.
And as they swing to the right, there's a great change in the scene, an enormous contrast, because they're leaving the spaciousness and the graciousness of Hyde Park and moving between the high cliffs of buildings which form Oxford Street. They're turning out of Hyde Park and going into the heart of commercial London, the London of shops, the London of stores, the London of offices. And there's a riot and variety of decoration.
And the only way I could see, really, was to hook my arm round the railings, and I found a sort of a ledge that I could just about put one foot on, and that's the only way I really could see over the heads of some of the people. But I managed to see, the most important parts. The tops of the coach, I saw the Queen. Couldn't see the bottom of the coach or anything like that, but this vision of gold, it was like a fairy coach. Beautiful, all brightly lit inside. Really opulent, especially with the horses and the outriders in red velvet and the powdered wigs. There was a great excitement because she had the crown on, and even on a dull day like that, I can remember it flashing and sparkling. Everybody cheered and whistled and stamped, and I was so excited. I had a little box brownie camera, and I was trying to take a photograph hanging onto the railings with one arm and taking the pictures with the other.
When the coach with the Queen in it came past, I could see her little face looking out through the raindrops. She did look right over, and she waved. That was a big thrill to a young girl. I think there was a railing along behind us, and my mother, I think, helped me to sit up on top of that and got too sore, and then I was back down on my tiptoes I can remember the bands and the soldiers, the Queen of Tonga with her feathers, and she wouldn't have the hood of her carriage up. She was very smiling and ebullient and weaving and all sorts of coloured feathers round her.
And as it comes clear into view now, absolutely straight in front of us and not 150 yards away, we can see the whole majesty and splendour of this golden coach. And for a moment the rain has let up. There's just a light wind rustling the leaves, and we can see the colour gleaming off that coach as Her Majesty comes towards us and we greet her.
I've never seen so many people together at one time. We were presenting arms to all kinds of people, but when carriage came past, the effect it had on me as well as the other lads, it felt as though your heart was bursting. You were virtually crying when you presented arms to the Queen. We were no more than about 10 yards away at the most, and I don't think I've ever seen anything as beautiful in all my life. And shortly after that, Field Marshal Viscount Montgomery came up on his horse, a bit like Wellington, I suppose, and he moved across the parade and he inspected every one of us.
Forces of Britain to march by. And now here come the regulars. Each unit bearing its colours, those colours with all the noble battle honours on them. And it's a roll call again of our military fame passing by. It's impossible to pick them all. They're marching by in serried ranks. But let us recall one or two of them to give you the measure of the excitement and courage that they represent. 300 years of our military history. Brigade, the Green Jackets, as they go by, why we remember Corunna. The Parachute Regiment, probably the newest in the army, and we remember the Red Devils at Arnhem and the 3 VCs they earned and the Rhine Crossing, and then regiments from Ulster, the Royal Ulster Rifles. They've got a record that goes back to the Peninsular War. Yes, and the glory we remember that they won at the Somme, and their landing in Normandy and D-Day. And the Highland regiments, all 5 of them represented here, all wearing tartan trews and bonnets and short white gaiters and sporrans. And we remember them, the Gordon Highlanders, who carried Sir John Moore to his burial at Corunna. Yes, the regular army marches by in their new number 1 uniform, and splendid and worthwhile it is. And again, it's the bands who carry them past towards Constitution Hill.
It was the most wonderful sight. We'll never see a procession like that again, I'm sure, in my lifetime or anyone else's. It went on for 2 hours. It was fairly slow moving. That was one reason why it took so long. So you could see everything very clearly. There were lots of bags. My father was actually in the procession as a member of Her Majesty's forces, a bit bedraggled and serious looking, but no doubt very proud to be there. And then, of course, the final crowning glory when the Queen came along in her coach, looking really wonderful and managing to smile at everybody, as she always does. I don't know how she does it, but it seemed as if she was there just for you.
Prince Charles is looking out with delight as the Royal Navy go by, his father's own service. The Royal Marines come first, and how those white helmets and those pipe clay belts glitter and shine. You don't want any polish on that. It fairly sparkles as they go past the palace, lights up the whole place. And now, suddenly, dramatically, the colour changes. This is the most exciting colour change of the whole procession. There's the navy, dark blue, and behind, immediately behind them, the startling scarlet and black of the Brigade of Guards. Here's the whole Mall flooded with this colour. The Guards, in fact, where would we be on ceremonial occasions without them? Always, somehow or other, they managed to steal the show.
It was actually said it was the coldest June day since 1860. So it would have to be, wouldn't it? And people were so wet, and lots of them had umbrellas, and it was running off the umbrellas into your neighbour's collar and dripping down everywhere. It was quite fantastic. The people didn't seem to mind. You know, they were all in good spirits despite this cold and the wet. And there was one enterprising man. He sewed capes for 10 shillings a time. When anything happened along the route, people started, are they coming? Are they coming? And once everybody started clapping, so we thought, oh, what's going on? And it was a refuse lorry collecting all these piles of rubbish which people had thrown down. So this lorry came along and collected it all, so everybody laughed and clapped the lorry. And then, of course, all the other cars came along. There was Winston Churchill, and there was Pandit Nehru, and there were umpteen other royalties from European courts. and ministers from all over the world. Some of them we didn't know, but they came car after car after car. And then the Queen herself, and at her side was Prince Philip. And they looked very magnificent. She was so beautiful. I was excited that I actually, as a German, being there to see the Queen, but the real significance of the entire procession actually came to me later on. That moment you didn't realize that it was a part of history, which I had actually experienced.
And there is Her Majesty the Queen, with the Duke beside her, and here are the final glorious uplifting cheers that greet her as she returns home.
One impression follows another, and as one shuts one's eyes, those pictures come again. Something that was history, something that was the past, and that was almost fairy tale romance, those golden coaches, and the lighter ones, sprung so lightly on their wheels they seemed to move like thistledown. You just realized that this was one of the great occasions of your life, that you might never see anything like this again. Above all, that in that particular way, you might never feel anything like that again. Children, there were here, when you saw their faces light up, such a scene as some of them may not see these, we hope, these 20, 30, 40, 50 years again. Such a sight as many of them, brought up in an age of austerity, battle dress, and dull clothing, can hardly have dreamt of. But nothing, I swear, ever gave the impression of colour and majesty that this procession gave in life.
The windows open of the balcony room, but Her Majesty will not come out. The crowd will do its very best to encourage her to come, but she'll not come out until the moment comes. And I'm looking all the time from my vantage point on the Victoria Memorial away to the south, when the flight past is due. And now, that moment has come. Here she is in all the splendor of her coronation robe and the imperial state crown, standing on the balcony, being acclaimed by London town. Up to the very gates of the palace as we wave towards Her Majesty standing there. The squadrons of the Royal Air Force are roaring towards us, and we go over to Charles Gardner flying in a Meteor 7 for the air view of this memorable scene.
Just dead ahead of me, of course, is the head and shoulders of my own pilot, our squadron leader, Kelly, taut with concentration, his eyes flicking this way and that way as we keep our formations. And now London is coming up under us. London is coming. I can see decorations in the small streets by Lambeth. And we're coming up to Lambeth. We're near Lambeth Bridge, and there is a touch of sunshine glinting on the Thames, the first sunshine we've seen all the way round. And this is a happy omen. And now the Crystal Palace is behind us, the Thames just underneath us. And I can see the flags in the street, and I can see people running around. I can see Buckingham Palace with over the moor. I can see the splash of scarlet and the royal standard above it. And there I can just see, as we come across the Mall now, the figures of people there, and the central figure I know must be that of Her Majesty the Queen. And now that was very kaleidoscopic, I'm afraid, a swift pattern of blur of colour as it flashed under us at 345 miles an hour. Just a blur of colour, a spectrum, and only one thing remains steady and central and sharp-edged now in my mind, one instantaneous photograph. The balcony and the Queen. And New Elizabeth saluted from the air. by the new Elizabethans.
And here the splendid finale. We look towards the south, and wing after wing of the Royal Air Force comes tearing overhead. The thunder of their engines mingling with the cheers of the crowd. And who could imagine a more glorious finale to a day? Here's the scene. Thousands and thousands of people flooding still down the Mall, pressing up against the railings, crowding the Victoria Memorial, hats waved, flags waved, and on the balcony this glittering scene. A glimpse to us who heard and watched of the splendours in the Abbey, and still overhead the squadrons fly. Salute to Her Majesty. And as they fly, Her Majesty turns and waves to the crowd. Rank after rank they come flying overhead.
As a wing commander commanding Royal Air Force begin very much touch and go in the morning as to whether we were going to take part or not. And about midday, I think it was, I was actually told by group headquarters that the fly past was cancelled. And I went back to my residence and changed into a pair of old gardening trousers and was just about to set off and do a bit of gardening when a chap arrived on a motorcycle and said, "It's on." So I rushed up to the airfield and just had time to throw on a flying overall and brief the wing pilots and took off to the rendezvous where we had another 5 wings of Meteors. I was leading the last wing. I think we flew over the Mall at about 200 feet. But it all worked exceptionally well in spite of the weather, and we were all very proud and thrilled to have done it. One caught a very vague glimpse of Her Majesty on the balcony as we flashed past, and we returned to base very jubilant about the whole thing.
And again we turn to the balcony. Her Majesty in the imperial crown waving again. And at her side, the Duke of Edinburgh, and before them, Duke of Cornwall, Prince Charles, and little Princess Anne. The Duke now almost lifts her up to look at the crowd. A lovely family picture. It's as we wish to remember them on this day of coronation. The Queen Mother at their side, Princess Margaret, the Queen Mother. We can see that lovely deep blue of the garter she wears, and the lovely whiteness of the dresses of the maids of honor. And again, the shouts, the cries.
That morning we just all went out to the street to get ready for a street party. To me, really I didn't understand what the coronation was in full, but a street party was something else, really took over from what the meaning of the coronation was.
Well, we've collected £12 of fruit, £3 of sugar just gone into the cake. But biggest part of all is the icing. Collected £24 of icing sugar. And it's all come from people with just spoons full of sugar that couldn't afford to give any rations up. We collected 6pence off everybody, every house, and just 3pence off the old age pensioners. But we was only prepared for trimmings at first. Well, now it's a party both for young and old, all in really a big way.
They put this big table out and they kept it covered from us youngsters because we weren't in the best of areas, you know, and when they uncovered the table, there were cakes and chocolates and sweets. And actually, I wouldn't eat them because I wasn't sure what they were. So we nibbled away at a few of them. But to these sort of things, it just seemed to us that maybe the Queen had sent them down to us because we'd never seen them. So we thought this must have been what she was giving us for this coronation day.
There's a woman down our street and she's moved out, so as soon as it was raining, we couldn't have the party in the street. They've all had presents. They had like barrows and pencils to match with coronation written on them. And what did that? Oh, some had the handbags, didn't they? And planes. I mean,
what, little aeroplanes?
Yes, you know.
And then I was a Highland dancer, so I had to go and change out of my coronation dress into my Highland dress and give them this exhibition of Highland dancing. And boy, were we tired. and I had a doll, and my mum dressed it in red, white and blue. And this doll came to the coronation party. I remember it had a big bonnet, and it was a red, white and blue striped bonnet and a striped dress, and she had on white shoes, and all the wee girls brought their dolls along, and they sat on the bench beside us.
I was expecting my baby, and I wasn't really sort of thinking about it happening on that day at all. The day arrived, and they took me into the labour ward, you know, and gosh, it was all excitement. They're all rushing round. They're saying, come on, because we must have a coronation baby on today. And they suddenly said, it's a girl, you know. And my husband said her name was to be Mary. And so I said, well, we'll have Elizabeth. We'll name her after the Queen.
As they stand there, Her Majesty presses that button which starts the whole of the London illumination. A strange, dramatic, exciting sight. She gives the signal, and along the Mall, the light runs, lifting up those arches, those coronation arches that have leapt right across this wonderful coronation way of London, so lightly, so airily. Now they seem to rise right above the crowd, above the earth, against the sky. There they are, glorious, airy traceries of light. The Duke of York's column is lit up, Nelson's column is lit up, and that's the signal. All over London, eyes are watching as Nelson's column rises in a glorious cylinder of light. They press the signals, and every building in London, dare I say it, the whole of London, is lit up.
I remember the papers at the time said it was a new Elizabethan age, you know, this was going to be a new golden age, age of discovery, and especially with the conquest of Everest, adventures, discoveries, and it was all new and golden, and the Queen was very young, and it was all very exciting, very exciting. It was a diversion, it was something to take you out of yourself.
Everyone had come through the war, and they were still pulling together and loyal to each other and loyal to the royal family who had come through the war with them.
We want the Queen, we want the Queen. That's the theme song, the rhythm of the shouting of the crowd. And indeed, there's not one of us here, even at the end of this long, exhausting, tiring, but so exciting and moving coronation day, that doesn't wish that she would come out just for a moment, the climax of our excitement. We're looking right, in fact, I'm looking anxiously now, right into the famous balcony room. And yes, and the crowd sense it, listen. Yes, the footmen have appeared. They're going to open those long, graceful glass doors leading out in the balcony. They're flung wide open. And now, out onto the balcony, there they are. Two lovely figures. Listen to the acclaim of the crowd. Yes, there they are, midnight in London, and standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty the Queen, lovely, white, tranquil, graceful, the Duke of Edinburgh at her side, lifting his hand high in acclaim to the crowd. A wonderful finale to Coronation Day.
Definitely a day worth remembering, as even after all these years, you know, when I think about it, the excitement comes back. She isn't just any monarch, is she? Because even though most of the dominions have gone now and have become independent, she was once the ruler of the largest part, or the largest realm on this earth.
Now the applause you hear is for an airman who has just succeeded in following a sailor to the top of the tallest lamppost in Piccadilly Circus. As all the rest of London quietens down, these daring climbers, the centre of the last nucleus of London's celebration, are climbing the lamppost under the admiring gaze of another sailor in oilskins who's sitting on the top of a set of traffic lights. The present contender is from, I think, the Princess Pat's Light Infantry of Canada, and a very game show he's making of it for a landlubber, with a certain amount of assistance and some hindrance from friends in the vicinity. There are more people in the circus now than saw the coronation from here. A solid sea of heads from one side to the other. It ends abruptly. The funnel up to Glasshouse Street is completely empty. Shaftesbury Avenue is empty. Regent Street has only a few slow, home-going feet, but the circus itself is crowded, and here and there in isolated spots a hokey-cokey or a conga springs up, and there a Highlander springs into an 8-some reel with a little hand clapping because he's found a Scots lass down there. And you may see all the shoulder flashes from the procession here. There's the Federation Regiment, and there are the Bearnese and the Bush Shirts from Southern Rhodesia, a Gordon Highlander, and there the chain metal shoulder piece of a Sherwood Ranger, and the Pakistani flash, Grenadiers, Marines, sailors, and although Eros is in a golden cage, and that too is lit up with fairy lights, it's not very effective at keeping the little god prisoner. He seems to have leaked out very effectively and draped most of the uniform arms with clinging feminine hands, and a few of the lampposts with clinging male hands. The present moment, a civilian with an unfortunately trailing mackintosh is being pulled back to safety or failure according to how you look at it, while away in the corner a few sailors are starting a dance, and a last congo over there led by a girl breaks out away towards Regent Street.
It was a spectacle, the honour, a more beautiful sight I'll never see. The Queen's face, her youth, her beauty, so regal. No sternness, just sheer beauty and poise, as a Queen should be. You know, nothing false. Everything was natural.
And here in Trafalgar Square, although some of the floodlights are dimmed, the revelry certainly goes on. All around the great open space are groups of revelling, happy folk. Civilians, servicemen, I can see the uniforms of all three services, a big crowd of airmen just going by, 2 naval petty officers ahead of them, 2 Air Force cadets coming now, the banging of balloons. It seems that everyone and his girlfriend has a big red, white and blue balloon bobbing at the end of a long string, and every now and again a scuffle breaks out and there's a tremendous series of pops, and it's all good, clean fun. And right away across now, looking up towards St. Martin's, I can see small groups of wild little dance parties. Knees Up Mother Brown, conga lines, the samba, an occasional firework away in the square, and on every corner, the patient London bobbies standing by, smiling tolerantly, finding apparently very little to do indeed. And then as I turn yet again towards Admiralty Arch to look up that magic mile of the Mall, I see now that the tide of faces is turned towards us. The people are streaming away from the palace now, streaming down here to the square to sing and to dance, and still that magic mile is a soft glow of gold and crimson for the banners and the soft lighting between the trees. And now as I look to the little island at the head of Northumberland Avenue, I can see another party going on there. A great deal of singing and dancing, and a very natty execution of the Lambeth Walk by a party of sailors and their girlfriends. And away down Northumberland Avenue towards the darkened river, the great flotilla of little ships which congregated for the firework display is dispersing now, going up and downstream as far as Richmond and Twickenham perhaps, carrying the whole parties in the launches, singing to a guitar, the soft lights bobbing on the dark stream. But still, in the centre of the square, the festivities continue. More and more dancing, more and more people pouring in, and more happy revellers, tired now, pouring down into the undergrounds to return home and call it a day, and what a day.
We have had a day which the oldest are proud to have lived to see, and which the youngest will remember all their lives. It is my duty and my honor to lead you to its culmination. You have heard the Prime Ministers of the Empire and Commonwealth pay their moving tributes on behalf of the famous states and races for whom they speak. The splendors of this 2nd of June glow in our minds. Now, as night falls, you will hear the voice of our sovereign herself, crowned in our history and enthroned forever in our hearts.
We had got through a lot of the building up period, which everybody was keen to do. After all, quite a lot of England had been destroyed in the war, and quite a lot of us felt we were lucky to be alive still. I think the building up was still in one's mind, and I've no doubt whatsoever that almost no cynicism existed at the start of the second Elizabethan period. I think that is a tremendously important psychological aspect of the whole of the coronation. People really thought this was the dawn of a new epoch. In one way, of course, it was, with a very young queen with the same name as a very great predecessor, and I think we thought this was the start of a great era.
When I spoke to you last at Christmas, I asked you all, whatever your religion, to pray for me on the day of my coronation, to pray that God would give me wisdom and strength to carry out the promises that I should then be making. Throughout this memorable day, I have been uplifted and sustained by the knowledge that your thoughts and prayers were with me. I have been aware all the time that my peoples, spread far and wide throughout every continent and ocean in the world, were united to support me in the task to which I have now been dedicated with such solemnity. As this day draws to its close, I know that my abiding memory of it will be not only the solemnity and beauty of the ceremony, but the inspiration of your loyalty and affection. I thank you all from a full heart. God bless you all.